But all of that said, Alabama basketball and all other SEC teams had their SEC conference schedule officially dropped today. And with the schedule being dropped, obviously we had already gone through. I recorded an episode talking about the home and away splits and that I was pretty happy with what we got. But we now know where those dates are actually going to fall, what's going to fall on the weekend, what's going to fall in the midweek. And I think that, long story short, I'm pretty happy with what Alabama got, right? I think the Alabama got a very favorable draw. Obviously, I've not seen all the other schedules. I've only, had time to really go through Alabama's. But I think that overall, I think Alabama got a pretty favorable draw. Most of the big games are on the weekend, and that is something that we haven't been able to say a ton. Alabama has had a lot of midweek games that were massive games, and that's never been the most fun thing. So I think that is something that's kind of big to say with this, is that most of the games that are, big kind of showstopper games are on the weekend, and that's obviously just a very, very good thing to see. So let's start at the top. I want to say, we'll go game by game. I'll also flash it up here on the screen for anybody that may not have seen all of it. We're going to go game by game. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think, the way that these games are stacked together. Then we'll go through some of my I think that there's one area of the schedule, like one 4-game stretch, that's going to be a very tough 4-game stretch. And then I also will go through kind of my schedule predictions, what I think will be a successful season, etc. First things first, Alabama starts it off opening weekend of SEC play with Alabama-Kentucky. Alabama-Kentucky opening weekend in Coleman Coliseum. That's going to be a massive game. I mean, there's no other way to say it. That is going to be an absolutely insane game. When you pair this with all of the non-conference games that Alabama has officially inked, and how prepared Alabama basketball should be, and I'm going to pull it up now. But how prepared Alabama should be for this game, I think that Alabama is going to be at a level. Alabama's going to be prepared and be ready for a level, to be at that competition where they're just going to be able to be prepared for this Kentucky game, right? Now, that's not to say Kentucky isn't going to also have a massive non-conference slate. Kentucky is one of those teams that does have a big non-conference slate. I think this is going to be a game where both teams, right? Both teams are going to be super prepared coming into this game. Just at a glance, you've got your Players Era games that are going to be Thanksgiving weekend. You got St. John's in Madison Square Garden. You got Illinois in the United Center in Chicago. You got Purdue in Tuscaloosa. You got Arizona in Birmingham. You've got Clemson for the SEC ACC Challenge. You just have a very, very loaded non-conference slate. And Alabama will to go with UTSA, you got South Florida, obviously your return game with North Dakota. And then again, when you're talking about those Players Era games, that includes Gonzaga, right? So, at a minimum, you're talking St. John's, Purdue, Illinois, Gonzaga, Clemson, and Arizona, just for big marquee non-conference games. Those are massive games, right? And I think that when you have all of those games, I think those games will have prepared you for a team at the skill set of Kentucky, right? Obviously, Kentucky's going to give you something that those teams are not going to have. Kentucky's going to play very fast, very high pace, very up-tempo style of play, similar to what Alabama is. With Mark Pope's offense, I think that Kentucky is going to be, a good team. It also is the return trip for Mohamed Diabate. Right, you have Mohamed Diabate that entered the portal this season. By all accounts, Alabama tried to keep him. Mohamed Diabate chose money and ended up going to Kentucky. And so this is going to be a time when Mohamed Diabate comes back to Coleman Coliseum. I'm sure that he will have a warm welcome into Coleman Coliseum on that Saturday. It will be a packed house, right? It will be a sold-out affair. I'm sure that will be one of the biggest games of the year. I expect nothing less. Then the midweek for that week, you have at Vanderbilt. At Vandy, as always, in Memorial Gymnasium is never the easiest. I think with the coaching change and with how competent, without a better way to say it, competent that Vandy was last season, I think that Vandy with Mark Byington has done a good job. I think that Vandy also is, building a roster, and I think that Vandy will be a decent team this season, right? I have no reason to suspect that Vandy will be bad. I think that Vandy will end up being pretty good. I do think that Alabama wins that game, even in Memorial. Nate Oates has done a good job in Memorial Gymnasium, but in general, I think that you always have to kind of circle Vandy when it's at Vandy because that arena has such weird shooting lines and shooting angles that it's just a weird gym to shoot in. Then you have Alabama playing Texas. Obviously, new look Texas with a new head coach. New roster. I think that Texas will be okay. This one, however, is in Coleman Coliseum. Coleman Coliseum on a Saturday, I see no way Alabama loses to Texas. Simply put, I think that Alabama is just a much better team than Texas. I think that, when you look at Alabama, obviously this game being in Coleman Coliseum on a weekend, I don't think there's really any chance that Alabama loses that game. Then the midweek, and a very fun place to play. I've been there a couple of times now, but Mississippi State. Alabama plays at Mississippi State. Obviously, Chris Jans is a great coach. I think that he's done a really good job with his team, with the physicality and defense that he's able to play for. I think that in general, going to Mississippi State is generally a very tough game. But I will say the fact of where Alabama gets this game, I think that Alabama gets it in a really good spot. I think that Alabama gets this game in a spot where it's not sandwiched between really, really tough games. I think that it's sandwiched between okay games, but it's sandwiched between Oklahoma and Texas. And I would not consider those to be top-tier SEC teams for this upcoming season. Obviously, could they make waves? Absolutely. But I don't think that these are going to be the top of the SEC. So I do think that Alabama gets Mississippi State in a good spot. Midweek game could be a short week to prepare, depending upon if it's a Tuesday or Wednesday game. But, I think that in general, that's a pretty good draw for Alabama for going to Starkville. Then to Oklahoma on the weekend. Obviously, back-to-back road trips is never the best. I was actually in Norman for Alabama's last game in Norman. That was the Brandon Miller number one upset where the court got stormed on us for the SEC Big 12 Challenge. It wasn't great, right? No other way to put it. It was not great. I think that Alabama should win this game. I think that Alabama is clearly the better team than Oklahoma. I think that, again, I think this is a good spot for Alabama. Nate Oates is going to look to get his win in Norman. I don't see any reason that he shouldn't get that win. Obviously, there was voodoo that happened that game that I was at, that the court got stormed, but I don't think that Alabama loses this one. Then we have the Tennessee game. It's a toss-up, right? Alabama has struggled with Tennessee, to put it absolutely lightly. Alabama has struggled with Tennessee for the last few years. Alabama has not done well against Rick Barnes. I personally think that changes this year. I think that those type of offense and the type of players that Alabama brought in was specifically to be able to go up against this type of team. I think that having such bigger guys and such longer, lankier guys that are going to be able to defend and be able to play with that physicality that Tennessee's going to try to bring, but also be able to score. I think that Alabama has the best team that's best prepared to play Tennessee. I personally think that Alabama wins the game in Coleman Coliseum. If you were to ask me today, I think we split. I think that we win in Coleman, they win in Thompson-Boling. But, like I said, that's my personal thoughts of the Alabama-Tennessee game currently. Then you got your midweek game at home against Missouri. This is, a game that I think could go either way, but I do think that Alabama should beat Missouri. Missouri is a team that Dennis Gates, has had some really good seasons and obviously some really, really poor ones. I think that Missouri is a team that kind of you just don't know what you're going to get. So, is there a world where Missouri puts a good game on Alabama? Sure. But I do suspect that Alabama is going to be good in this game. I do think that Alabama is the better team and should win this game. Then it starts what I think is the toughest four-game stretch of the entire season. The four-game stretch is at Florida, home against A&M, at Auburn, at Ole Miss, right? 3 or 4 on the road, and then Texas A&M that just beats you up and rebounds. Obviously, this is a new look A&M team, so it's not the rebounding A&M team that we're used to. This is going to be a Bucky McMillan A&M team, but don't want to skip over the current defending national champions. Alabama only gets Florida one time this season, and it's in Gainesville. So, indeed, they're going to have to play the defending national champions in Gainesville on a Saturday. This is going to be a tough game. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Do I think that Alabama has a chance to win it? Sure, right? They're not going to have Walter Clayton. They're not going to have some of the guys that helped win that national title for them. So, I do think that Alabama is going to have a very good chance to win this game. But it's still Florida. It's still the defending national champs, the defending SEC champs. This is a really good team. I suspect nothing less other than this team is going to be very, very good. My gut says this is probably a loss, but I think that Alabama has a chance? Absolutely, right? If you give me Nate Oates on a floor with a good team that can shoot the ball, that Alabama will be this season, and I think that we will be, at least above average defensively. I think that they have the ability to beat anyone on any given night. Will they? It's a great question, but I do think that they have that ability, right? They're not going to go into any game this season completely undermatched where they're just going to lose immediately. Florida's going to be a tough one in Gainesville. Obviously, they have a lot of transfer guys like Xavier Lee and a bunch of others, so I am very curious to see what happens with Florida and how they're able to, what their team really looks like when it's all said and done. But I do think that Alabama is going to have a very tough matchup in Gainesville, to say the least. Then I just mentioned them, but A&M, right? This is A&M. At least it's in Coleman, right? I really like that. I also like the fact that I'm not playing Buzz Williams. Buzz Williams, when he was at A&M, was just the kind of team that you just didn't want to have to play. They were going to put 50 offensive rebounds, it felt like. They were going to muddy up the game, and he just made it Alabama had a lot of success against Buzz, but it really just, he muddied up the game, and it was a tough game to play, right? It was a tough game to watch. It was such a poor offensive shooting performance and offensive showing. But that is no more, right? You have Bucky McMillan, a guy who some Alabama fans, wanted to be the head coach at Alabama at one point, or think, is a potential future successor to Nate Oates if something were to happen, due to the fact that Bucky obviously coached at Mountain Brook and then at Samford here in the state, in the greater Birmingham area. But, I'm very curious to see how it's going to work in year one in Bucky McMillan, right? It's a completely new look roster. It's a completely new look team, completely new look style of play. Do I think they could win some games? Sure, they have all the money in the world. They've got a decent roster, but it's still X's and O's. It's still how the basketball game is played. My gut says we beat them, especially in Coleman on a Saturday, or I guess this one's actually a midweek game. But I do think in general, Alabama should be able to have, some success in this game. I do think that Alabama beats Bucky in his first trip to Coleman. Then you have at Auburn on February the 7th. So you have both, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, but both the Alabama-Auburn games are on the weekends. Thank you, right? I think that's what the Alabama team was able to get this season. We're talking about the midweek games versus the weekend games. I think that the Garth Glisman and all the guys of the SEC conference, obviously you're not doing this just for Alabama, but I think that in general, the marquee Alabama games and the marquee games for the top teams competing are on the weekend. Thank you so much for that, right? This is something that we've argued about for the last few years, where Alabama, wasn't getting big games on the weekend. It hurts attendance. It hurts the atmosphere. It hurts the feel of the game. Getting these big games on the weekend is exactly what we've been asking for. Simply put, going to Auburn Arena is going to be tough, right? Can Alabama win? Sure. Will they win? We'll have to see, right? All the Alabama-Auburn games have been very, very good, so I would expect it to be nothing less. But, does Alabama have a chance? Absolutely. Then to Ole Miss to end kind of the gauntlet of a 4-game stretch. Honestly, personally, if you can go 2-2 in this stretch, I think you're very happy. If you can go 3-1, you're ecstatic, right? I think 2-2 is reasonable with wins against A&M and Ole Miss. If you can pick up Florida or Auburn, you're really, really happy about the stretch. Simply put, I think this stretch tells you a lot about your season, right? These are 4 very, very good teams, 4 very good coaches. and just going to be a very, very good stretch for Alabama. Ole Miss at Ole Miss, tough place to play. Really good coach in Chris Beard. I think that Alabama has the ability to win, of course. Does Ole Miss have the ability to win? Absolutely. Like I said, personally, I'm going to take Alabama in this one. I think that Alabama is able to get it done. But this is going to be a very, very good game. Then we come back to Coleman for back-to-back games. You have South Carolina on the weekend. Not sure what to expect out of South Carolina. I think that South Carolina, Alabama should be much better than them. Don't really have a ton of super high hopes for South Carolina, simply put. But I think that South Carolina, we'll be curious to see what happens. Arkansas, Calipari is never, an easy out all the time. But I think that Calipari, the game has passed him by is the best way I can put it. I don't think that Arkansas is the team that I don't think that Cal is the coach that he once was. I don't think that he runs the style of play that he once did. Do I think that Arkansas is going to have a pretty good team? Yeah, of course, right? Arkansas has some really good returners. They have some other guys that transferred in. They're going to have a great team, but I would not bank on the fact that Arkansas is just going to be this top-notch, beat everybody type team. It's going to be a midweek game, so it's going to be one that, the energy may not be quite as insane, right? Like in a perfect world, maybe you switch this one and the LSU game, it's that next game, but you can't get all the perfect games on the perfect weekend. So, I understand that. But like I said, Arkansas is one that I think that Alabama, it's a sneaky one. I think that it's in a good spot, though. Again, between South Carolina and LSU, I think that's a really good spot for us to get it. So I'm not too concerned, but I would say that is one that, Alabama just needs to be aware of. Then you got LSU. At LSU, Alabama's done really, really good in that arena. There's no other way to put it. I think that LSU has, Alabama struggled in the first half against LSU, and a lot of that was mental this last year. That was the game that Mark Sears ended up getting sit. In general, I do think that, Alabama should win this LSU game pretty handily. LSU has not done anything in the transfer portal to really make me think, oh, wow, they're going to be a dominant team. So, my gut says Alabama beats LSU fairly handily. Mississippi State at home, I would suspect Alabama wins all of their home games. I think that Alabama, got a pretty good home split this season for games that should be fairly winnable. Mississippi State is no other option. Again, Chris Jans is a great coach. It's never an automatic win on your schedule because of the style he plays, but Alabama has had a ton of success against him, right? Even though he plays such an gritty style, I do think that Alabama still has a lot of success against him, and I think that Alabama still is able to knock off Mississippi State. Then you got three, pretty good games here to close it out. You get at Tennessee. This is a place that Alabama has struggled. There's no other way to put it. Obviously, the heartbreak last season, and in general, just Tennessee has had our number. There's no other way to put it. Tennessee and Rick Barnes have had our absolute number, and Thompson Bowling is not a place we've had a ton of success. Do I think we can win? Sure. Will we win? I don't know, right? If you were to ask me today, give you a win-loss, I'm going to probably chalk it as an L, but, that's my personal thought. Could we win it? Absolutely, right? I'm not sure what it's going to be, but that is a game that, if you can get it, you're just absolutely thrilled. And I think that it's going to prepare you for March, if nothing else, because it's going to be a hostile environment and a great team. At Georgia, Alabama's had a lot of success against Georgia. I don't think that this is the greatest team of all time. I don't think that that's a crazy thing to say. I think that Alabama is able to beat Georgia. It's on the road, so it gives you a little extra question, but I do think that Alabama is able to take care of Georgia. And then for senior night, Alabama closes out with Auburn in Coleman Coliseum. So you're able to have Auburn in Coleman Coliseum. There is a very good chance that this game has regular season SEC expectations on the line, whether it be, regular season outright title, whether it be, obviously it's going to be senior night. This is going to be a big time game. This is going to be a big time, overall festivities. I will be very curious to see what all happens if Alabama was able to win it. Obviously, Alabama was able to spoil Auburn's net cutting senior night last season with Mark Sears' buzzer beater. So Auburn will be looking to get that same revenge on Alabama with them being able to spoil it. Will it end up happening again? Who knows? All I know is when Alabama and Auburn meet up in basketball, it has been absolutely electric. I would suspect, obviously, Alabama was able to get this win. I think that Alabama has been nails in Coleman Coliseum. I would suspect that they're going to have a lot riding on this one, and that Alabama will be able to get the win over Auburn. So, if you were to ask me today, what are my expectations on what I realistically think is going to happen? I would probably say give me 2-2 in the stretch of Florida to Ole Miss. If you were to ask me today, probably loss at Florida, loss at Auburn, loss at Tennessee, and then let's say one extra loss in there. Let's say 14-4. Could I see 15-3? Sure. But I do think that it's somewhere in that 14-4, 13-5. 13-5 to 15-3, I think, is the range in which you're going to see. This is a really, really good SEC. I think this is going to be another season where the SEC tries to put a ton of teams into March Madness. Obviously, are they going to be able to beat the record from last season? I highly doubt that, but the SEC has gotten better and better and better with the talent and coaching that they've been able to get, as well as the talent on the floor with the athletes. So I do think that this is going to be another really, really good SEC basketball season. Again, I do think that Alabama got a very favorable draw with the way that the timing set up. I think that we only have one truly, truly, really tough stretch, and that's that stretch that I've mentioned over and over again of January 31st through February the 10th or 11th. I think that's going to be a super tough stretch. I think that, again, that stretch is going to determine a lot. You could go 1-3 in that stretch very easily, right? Again, 2-2 in that stretch, I think you're kind of holding serve. If you're able to get 3-1, I think you're absolutely thrilled. When we were talking about Florida earlier, I even forgot to mention Boogie Fland, right? The guy from Arkansas, transfers to Florida, right? Florida has been able to reload. When you win a national title, you're able to do that. People want to come play for you, right? So going to Gainesville to start out that stretch, I'm glad that that's the first game of that stretch. I will say that, right? If that Florida game was in that Ole Miss slot, I would be much more concerned about it. Again, I'm still very concerned because it's the defending national champs and it's going to be a very good team. But I think that our ability to potentially, lock in for that stretch is much better due to the fact that Florida kind of leads it. Like I said, personally, I'm going to go with 14-4 currently. Definitely could see as high as 15-3. I think anything over that, you just way exceeded expectations. 13-5, obviously not outside of the realm of impossibility either, but I do think that Alabama has a very good chance to be very successful this upcoming season. And again, they will be competing at the top of the SEC and competing for a conference title. 14-4, 13-5, 15-3 that we're talking about. I think all of these probably compete for that conference title that we were talking about. I think that Alabama will obviously be in the conversation for a top 4 bid in the conference. That's, when we talk about successful seasons, competing for that regular season title and being top 4 are kind of the absolute requirements. And I think that Alabama has a perfect setup with the roster as well as the schedule this season to be able to be at that level. So that's what I have to say about the Alabama basketball schedule. Like I said, we will be doing another episode later this week talking football. I've not forgotten about football. I just thought that basketball, with the schedule releasing, I know that a lot of people wanted to talk about it. I will also be bringing on some other people to talk SEC basketball. If you have any recommendations or any questions about that, feel free to let me know. I know I have one guy, lined up that I know a lot of you are going to be very happy to see. So, like I said, if you have any other recommendations or anybody y'all would like for me to interview, please let me know. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.